Now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, everyone, it's 2 o'clock and it's time to begin. My name is Rob Altamont, and I'll be your moderator for today's Hireko webinar titled, What Impact Positions Can Tell You About Your Game. The webinar will be led by Hireko's Technical Director, Jeff Summitt. I'd like to give you a few background notes on Jeff first. Jeff has worked in all facets of club making and repair since 1984 and has devoted the past 20 years to researching, testing, and analyzing thousands of different golf shafts. He has compiled his findings and research into the Dynamic Shaft Fitting Index, which is featured in the best-selling book, The Modern Guide to Club Making, and Total Club Fitting in the 21st Century. Additionally, he has authored the annual Dynamic Shaft Fitting Addendum, which instructs club fitters in the proper fitting and selection of shafts. Both books are available for sale online at hirekogolf.com. Let me get a few housekeeping items out of the way first. Your audio settings are muted, which means we cannot hear you. And if you have any questions, use the question box located in the upper right-hand corner of your dashboard. If for any reason you must leave the webinar, don't worry. It is being recorded and will be on youtube.com/hirekogolf and on our blog in about 1 hour. And the very last slide of the presentation has these addresses that you can view the recorded webinar also. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Hireko Golf's Technical Director, Jeff Summitt. Take it away, Jeff.
Thank you, Rob. More importantly, think of all those attending today's webinar. Our topic is what impact positions can tell you about your game. Most golfers don't know they could find out a lot about their game by simply examining the impact marks on their heads. So today, I want to talk about what those impacts mean. I want to also talk about the basic ball flight rules so you can better understand why the ball goes where it does. And by knowing what you or your customer's tendencies are, it goes a long way in determining what set of specifications would best match your game. So sit back and absorb some knowledge, which I hope will help lower your score. The first thing I want to talk about is clustering, or how close your shots are to one another. Obviously, we'd like all our impacts to be dead nuts right in the middle each and every time. But even the pros don't do that, so what we need to look at is any particular tendency one might have. On this slide, you're going to see two different items Hireko sells to tell you exactly where you're hitting the golf ball. The top views are impact labels, which are available for woods, irons, and soles, which we'll discuss a little bit later. The beauty of the impact decals is they allow you to peel them off, and then you could save that information and compare it against other clubs. And for fitters, it's a good habit to place these on your fitting sheets or forms and document the results. These pressure-sensitive labels leave a blue mark on impact. The size of the mark will change depending upon the force of the impact. For an average strength male golfer, the driver may leave a circle a little larger than 9/10 of an inch in diameter. That same golfer hitting a 5-iron might only leave a mark 85% of that size as the swing speed and force is reduced. We also sell a product called Market, which is an environmentally friendly aerosol that's sprayed directly on the club face of the club. It too shows immediately where impact is made on the face and can be simply wiped away with a dry cloth. The mark you see below the ball in this picture is actually the rubber tee from a driving range mat to show you just how sensitive these things are. The downside to the spray is you can't save the image unless you want to take a picture of it. But for club fitters who use a launch monitor to gather information, I think you're really going to like this product. See, a foreign material like a pressure-sensitive impact label can affect the spin rate of the ball. But with Market, it has no effects, ultimately giving you realistic data. The top two pictures show good clustering, which is ideally what we want. As I said before, we're not always going to have that type of pattern. But I do find golfers who have a good clustering on the face, however, it might be biased toward the toe, the heel, or higher and low on the face. Once you know these tendencies, it becomes easier to fit and adjust. The photo you see at the bottom shows a poor clustering of shots. Now, believe it or not, this is the same person hitting the club. The clubs were an identical length, shaft, weight, flex, etc. The only difference was the shaft, and obviously the shaft in this case was not a good fit for the player. Now, you've all heard the term sweet spot. Well, a spot is just that, a tiny spot. I like to think of it as a sweet area. The best place to hit the ball is perpendicular to the center of gravity of the club head, which is also referred to as the center of percussion. If you mishit this spot, then this will cause the head to rotate around its center of gravity and cause the ball to potentially go offline. Plus, the further the impact is made from the center of percussion, the more energy is consumed, resulting into a loss of distance. The good goal is to have the cluster pattern approximately the size of a quarter, while touring pros might be able to contain the impact area to a dime. On an iron, the center of gravity is roughly near the 5th score line and may be in the center of the score line area or slightly biased toward the heel. On a driver, the so-called sweet spot or sweet area is generally above the geographic center of the face and may be slightly biased toward the heel as well. Now, a lot of misdirected shots are a direct byproduct of being misaligned toward the target, ball positioning, and lack of balance. This is a matter of the Indian versus arrow theory. Have near the consistency of a robot. No matter how well designed a golf club is, it cannot produce desirable results under conditions. Let's start with ball position. Many teachers will have us vary the ball position relative to the stance, plus how far our feet are apart in the stance. The wider stance is for balance, and on longer clubs, especially where you need a better foundation. As the clubs become shorter, the narrower the stance becomes. On wedges, the ball may be positioned in the center of the stance, and the driver is the most forward position, often played off the front heel, with the rest of the clubs somewhere in between. Let's take the driver. On the right are impact labels that were placed onto one driver. And to control the tee height, the player hit from a driving range map. The only difference was the player was instructed to play the ball slightly more forward and back by only 2 ball widths in the stance. As you could see, by changing ball position, it had a dramatic effect upon the impact on the face. Not only that, but the trajectory and distances were greatly affected too. With the ball teed too far forward, the club already is bottomed out in the swing arc. It was on the upswing, resulting into the impact low on the face. Any lower or further forward that the golfer might have teed it, the golfer might even have topped it. If the ball position is too far back, this is going to cause a very steep angle of attack. And while this might be fine for a wedge or a short iron with a lot of loft, it's detrimental for a club that's already low lofted like a driver. Not only will the club be de-lofted at impact, but the steep angle of attack is going to cause excessive spin. This is why proper loft selection is critical when choosing your clubs. By observing your shot patterns, you can adjust the ball position in the proper placement to be able to hit the ball at the proper trajectory. You can also adjust your tee height if you prefer a certain ball placement in your stance. For instance, it might be helpful if you have a longer tee the further forward you place the ball in your stance. This will not only help by improving feel, but distance too. You might think that a ball struck in the sweet spot will result into a straight shot. Well, that's not always the case. We have our stance to thank for that. This is ultimately what changes our swing path. If your shoulders, hips, and feet are parallel to your intended target line, this produces what's called a square stance. However, if the shoulders, hips, and feet are aligned to the right of the target, assuming a right-handed golfer, this causes a closed stance and will force the club to come on an inside-to-out path. The complete opposite is the open stance, or where the shoulders, hips, and feet are aligned to the right of the target, as in the case of a right-handed golfer. This causes an outside-in swing path and is quite common among amateurs. In this slide, the diagram depicts the three different paths that are possible. With a straight or a square path, the way to think of it is you're hitting the back of the ball with a club face. With an outside-to-in path, you're actually hitting the outer portion of the golf ball. And with an inside-to-out swing, you're hitting on the inside portion of the ball. And that's probably the simplest way I know how to explain it. And to show you why this is important, let's go to the next slide. Another item that affects your direction is face angle at impact. This is the position of the face relative to the target line, and most associated with drivers and fairway woods is often they're designed with a specific amount of openness or closeness. But what I'm talking about here is not the face angle designed by the manufacturer, but rather how you return the club upon impact. Again, we have three different possibilities, starting with a square face angle at impact, or where the face is parallel to the target. An open face angle is where the face is pointed right to the target, at least for a right-handed golfer, while a closed face at impact points to the left. And for left-handed golfers, the opposite will occur at impact. Now there's swing analysis tools that are available or used by club fitters that can accurately measure the exact face angle at impact along with how many degrees inside out or outside in the path is on any given swing. Because the club face is traveling so fast, it's impossible to tell how many degrees the face angle may be open or closed, or if any, in the case of a square impact, without such a device. However, it might be possible to know by simply observing impact marks on the sole, plus having an understanding of ball flight patterns that we'll go over in a second. Now, the face angle directly affects the spin of the ball off of the face. We're going to keep things simple and just talk about center impacts or directly in line with the center of gravity of the head, so we're not factoring in gear effect from shots hit out near the heel or toe or higher and low on the face. Otherwise, we'd be here all day going over every single possibility. Let's start with the swing path that's exactly straight. If this were the case, then no side spin occurs. An open face at impact will actually create slice spin to the ball. And a closed face angle at impact will create hook spin. On the left, you'll see the sole of a club. And if you look carefully, there are a lot of clues to tell you how this person swings the golf club. Over time, you'll start to see brush marks from repeated impact with the ground or even with drive to range mats. It may be hard to see here, but the brush marks go in the direction from heel to toe on this club. If the face angle is square, then you'd see the brush marks perpendicular to the face. Look at the diagram for a second. If the brush marks are going from heel to toe, that would indicate that this person has an open face at impact. But if the brush marks were primarily going from toe to heel, that would indicate that the face is closed at impact. Usually the amount is minimal, like 5 degrees one way or another, or less. But a certain pattern will exist. See the white T mark left on the sole? I guarantee that was a slice, as the face would have had to have been severely open to produce that mark. Okay, to briefly recap, there are 3 face angles, open, closed, and square. There's 3 swing paths, straight, inside out, and outside in, which will produce 9 different ball flight patterns. We'll go over these one by one, but the chart that you see here will show what happens when, say, the face is square, but we have an outside-in path. In this case, it's going to result into a pole. In certain cases, depending on how open or closed the face angle is or the path, could result into much more severe situations than what we have shown. The diagram below is an overlay of each of the scenarios where the path and or face angle is no more than 2 degrees off of square, just to show you how far offline the ball can go with such little variation. And so you can follow and understand the 9 different possible ball flights better. I'm going to show that these are one based on a driver with 100-mile-an-hour clubhead speed. The approximate position of the ball is where the ball lands on the fly without any roll, and all the numbers on the grid represent yards. And lastly, the green shaded area that you see is the average width of a fairway, or 32 yards. Okay, let's start out with the easiest one to understand, and that's the straight shot. Regardless of the speed of the golfer, the ball will land on this same line. However, this is kind of the clinical approach, as it's nearly impossible to hit the ball with a perfectly square face as well as have a perfectly square path. But by limiting the face angle and path to fractions of a degree from being perfectly square, the result still can be considered a straight shot, as the direction left or right of target and any side spin is going to be minimal. Diagram B shows an example of a fade, where the path may be square, but the face angle is open at impact. And for a right-handed golfer, the ball is going to start straight and then turn to the right because of the slice spin. Even where the face is only open 2 degrees, it's enough to miss an average fairway width to the right for a golfer with an approximate 90-mile-an-hour or more swing speed. Diagram C shows just the opposite, or fade, or of the fade, which we call a draw. The hook spin comes from the close face angle, which results in the ball going to the left. And again, this is for a right-handed golfer. And just 2 degrees off is going to miss a fairway under, those conditions I mentioned earlier. Next, let's look over what happens on an outside-to-in path starting with diagram D. Now, with a square face, the result is a pole, basically a straight shot just going in the wrong direction. Because the face angle is square, no side spin is going to incur to further influence the ball flight. And up to 4 degrees outside in may still keep the ball in the fairway for most golfers. Diagram E represents a pole slice type of ball flight. This occurs when the path is outside to in, but the face angle is open. And for a right-handed golfer, the ball goes from left to right. In some cases, a fade is good and ends up at the intended target, and in other cases can completely miss a fairway or a green, depending on how many degrees outside in the path is in relationship to how open the face is. Plus, the higher the player's swing speed, the more pronounced this effect is. Now, for more skilled golfers, they intentionally fade the ball to work it around a particular hazard or shape the shot to a specific position on the green. The caption below the diagram shows the three different scenarios and underscores the difference in the different type of pole slices. Diagram F illustrates the pole hook, where the path is outside in and with a closed face. When severe, this is commonly called a duck hook. Rarely will a pole hook stay in a normal size fairway or on a green except for those with very low swing speeds. Diagram G is the first to illustrate the different scenarios when an inside to out path is present. In this case, the face is square, resulting into a push. And again, this is a straight shot just going in the wrong direction. Because the face is square, no side spin incurs, and again, up to 4-degree inside out may keep the ball in the fairway. Diagram H shows the dreaded push slice. This occurs when the path is inside to out, causing the push part of it. In addition, the face open creates the slice spin, making the ball even go further to the right for a right-handed golfer. This is the opposite of a pole hook, but the result is the same. The ball rarely remains in a fairway or on the green. The difference between a slice and a fade is the swing path, even though both are hit with open faces. In these cases, if the face is severely open, it can result in the ball going into an adjacent fairway or beyond. But in the pole slice, the golfer aims left by opening up the stance and then hitting the outside of the ball or with a closed face, and that causes the ball to fade back in. Our last diagram, I, shows what occurs when the path is inside out and the face is closed. And for a right-handed golfer, the ball starts left or just slightly right and then curves back left, which is known as the push hook. Where the ball lands in relationship to it depends on how many degrees inside out the path is, plus the number of degrees that the face is closed. Plus the player's swing speed and the club's loft affect the severity. When the swing speed is reduced or the loft increases, as in the case with higher lofted irons, the curvature that you see here will be reduced. The caption below the diagram shows, again, 3 different scenarios for the different types of push hooks. Now, hopefully, you've got a better understanding of how ball flight can vary by simply changing the ball position in your stance, the actual stance, and the face angle at impact. Now, we don't have time in today's webinar, but there are many things that can change the face angle at impact, and why shaft and club head selection are just so important. Okay. Now we got that out of the way, let's look at some other club head specifications and how they affect impact position. 2 that go hand in hand are length and lie. Let's say the impact marks vary all over the club face. Well, many might consider this to be a sign that the club is too long and too hard to control. Well, one easy solution is to put a new impact label or coat of market spray on the face and then hit the club again by choking down a ½ inch or an inch and seeing what improvements, if any, are made. Well, if it does, then you know it could be as simple as removing the grip, taking the extra length off the butt end, and re-gripping. However, if it doesn't, then it could be such things as improper grip size, the overall weight's either too light or too heavy, or the shaft is too flexible or too stiff, or it could be a combination of any of these things. On this slide is a club that a player had hit in the center of the face on a regular basis. What the picture shows, though, is what happens when I instructed this person to grip down 1 inch to simulate a shorter length. It just goes to show you that too short can be just as bad as too long. This is one time your mileage may vary regarding length, as not everybody responds the same way. Now here's why. Since nearly every club in the bag is a different length, the golfer learns to stand a certain distance from the ball, which is why this game is difficult to master. Certain tendencies, like consistently hitting out in the heel, indicating the club is too long, and hitting out consistently toward the toe, being too short, may be true for one person. However, for the next person, it might be the complete opposite. The lie of the club, or the angle of the shaft as it exits the head, also influences how far we stand away from the ball, or even how high or low we position our hands at address. One of the things we can do is look at the impact marks on the sole to see whether or not the lie is correct or not. Before we do, I want to show you a few diagrams why this is important. On the left, you see 3 heads at impact. The top one is considered too upright as the sole of the club comes in contact with the ground toward the heel. And I want you to notice how the score lines are tilted relative to the ground line. I should probably also state this. What we're referring to is at impact and not at address. You see, at address, the club might look like this with the toe slightly up in the air. But during the swing, the shaft and the swing plane can flatten out, and that is why we reference sole contact only at impact. Now on the bottom depicts a head that's too flat. And here you can see how the score lines are tilted relative to the ground. And this is showing that the sole now touches the ground out near the toe. Ideally, what we would like is the impact on the sole to be centered. And to understand why, look at the diagram to the right. If the player had a square path and is able to square the face upon impact, then we would want to be rewarded for that. In this case, it does. The ball flight would be straight, with the face being square, as it has no side spin. However, if the lie is incorrect, the face plane is no longer going to be pointing directly straight. Instead, I'm going to throw out a fancy term called lie dispersion. Let's say we have a 7-iron. It's only 2 degrees too flat or too upright. And the ball for an average strength golfer may veer offline 8 feet one way or another. Well, that may not sound like a whole lot. It could be compounded when you factor in an open or closed face, or when you get additional sides, where you get additional side spin, or if the player had a swing path other than square. I should also say that the lie dispersion has less of an impact as the loft reduces. And here's a good example. This is a driver that was hit with the market spray on it that I took a picture of. You can see that the lie at impact is clearly too upright. Again, you could see the tee is, I had to tilt the picture to show what the tee would have looked like at impact. We would expect to see the ball veer off to the left. This were a square path and a square face. But the reduced loft of a driver would only amount to about 7 yards offline for an average golfer. I actually witnessed this shot, and the ball went dead straight. And if you think about it, most golfers tend to push, fade, or even slice their drives, as most have an open face. So a lie that's going to be too upright might be a benefit for many. And oftentimes irons, wedges, and even certain putters can be adjusted for the lie. But for most drivers, fairways, and hybrids, they can't unless they have some sort of adapter system that can alter the angle by how the adapter is orientated inside the head. There are some items that you can use to check lie angle. Now, Hireko offers a commercially available lie board, and impact labels for the sole is shown here. But a piece of plywood large enough to stand and hit from works too. Plus, you can use electrical tape on the sole to see the scuff marks. Now, club makers will routinely use the face impact labels in conjunction with the sole labels to see where the impact is made on both the face and the sole. Again, ideally, the player would like to see a tight clustering of shots in the middle of the face and the marks on the sole being in the center. If you look at the bottom picture, you'll see that the blue impact marks on the sole making contact with the lie board. But if you were to look at this up close with your eye, you'd see small little lines running from the leading edge back to the trailing edge caused by the textured surface of the lie board. That's why I like using the lie board here. They're almost running perfectly perpendicular to the leading edge to show you that there was a square face angle at impact. Now the sole impact in this case looks fairly centered, meaning the lie is good. One other thing to see is the marks toward the face, meaning that the player was hitting down on the ball or had a descending angle of attack. This slide shows 3 identical heads with a removable shaft system so that they can be interchanged to pinpoint only one parameter, in this case lie angle. The only difference in the heads is one was 3 degrees upright, one was 3 degrees flat, and another standard lie. And a player hit each of these off the lie board, and you can see the results of the sole impacts. The 3-degree flat lie clearly shows impacts were marked well near the toe. The standard lie was closer to center, but still a little biased toward the toe. And the 3-degree upright club head showed that the scuff marks on the sole to be in the center indicated this would be the best of the 3, at least on the surface. There's 2 reasons why it may not be. First, we don't know where on the face the player is hitting the ball. You know, I'd rather have the lie off a little bit, but the player hitting the center of the face on a consistent basis, rather than the repeated impacts on the face in toward the heel, as was in this particular case. Secondly, we always want to watch ball flight. Let's say the sole impacts are consistently out near the toe and the ball travels off to the right on a regular basis. We're assuming that this is a right-handed golfer and that the ball flight is a push rather than a fade. This would be an indication that the club is too flat, and we might be able to alter the lie angle. If the opposite occurs, the sole marks are repeatedly toward the sole or in the heel, and the ball is pulled left, then we would know that this is probably too upright of a club. Again, we can remedy the situation by altering the lie to correct the misdirected shots. The rule of thumb over the years has been for every 1/4 of an inch the impact on the sole is away from the center, the lie should be adjusted by 1 degree. Now, however, let's say the sole impacts are out near the toe, but the ball is going straight. Do we actually bend the club? Well, my answer in this situation is no. One time I did an experiment. I had to bend an iron 6 degrees to get a person to hit the ball in the center of the sole. But once we watched the ball flight, it turned out to be a pull hook. The reason is the player came over the top with a closed face, which effectively trapped the ball. This is one of the downsides to indoor fitting into a net where you can't see the entire ball flight. I also remember years ago when the company I was working for sponsored a tour van with the legendary Lou Gibson as the technician. During a visit at one of the senior PGA Tour events, Sam Sneeds comes up to the van and says, "Lou, I need the lie bent 1 degree flatter." I asked how he knew. Lou just looked at me and said, "They know just by observing ball flight." Subsequently, the iron was bent. Sneed headed back to the range to test it out. And just like the commercial says, these guys are really good. One more parameter I want to address is offset and how it affects impact marks on the club. Pictured on this slide are 2 iron head models that are several years old now. I kept these two in my collection all these years because they're identical heads in all respects in terms of physical dimensions, lie, loft, weight distribution, etc. The only difference is one has 4 millimeters of offset and the other has 0. You won't find another combination like this today. The clubs were built using the exact same shaft, shaft flex, length, etc. So the only thing that we were testing is the effect of offset. Now if you look at the black electrical tape, you see it's worn through from hitting the lie board. On the offset club, the wear pattern is closest to the leading edge, while the reduced offset, or 0 in this case, is closer to the center of the sole. There are only so many causes why impact is made forward, center, or rear of the sole. We can go back to ball position. If it's too far forward, then the club is already bottomed out in the swing and the club is hitting on the upswing with more loft. If it's too far back in the stance, the player's hitting the ball before the bottom of the swing arc with less loft. Now, why does offset affect sole impact? Well, the added offset delays impact for a split second. Not convinced? Well, on the left are 2 irons superimposed using the shaft as the common reference point. Notice the one highlighted in gold, which is the reduced offset iron, just making contact with the ball, while the other, or the offset iron, is several millimeters behind. But it's probably more than that which meets the eyes. With an offset iron, hands may be positioned in a more forward position, causing a steeper angle of attack. Not only does delaying the impact create a more downward angle, but the face will have gone longer in the swing arc, making the face angle a fraction more closed. And this is why one reason that offset irons are recommended for higher handicap golfers who are more prone to fading their irons. Okay. Here's some tips on clubhead selection based upon cluster areas on the face. Remember I said earlier, not everybody's going to respond the same way when they're exposed to a different parameter, but at least this is a good start. We've shown irons on the sheet, but they very well could have been drivers, fairway woods, hybrids, you name it. For instance, if the person has a scatter pattern all over the face, well, that person should look at a larger head to give them more room for error, as the larger head will have a higher moment of inertia to reduce the amount of twisting on the off-center shots. However, you may be masking a major problem and the reason why this type of pattern shows up in the first place. The grip could be a wrong size, causing some inconsistency problems. Possibly the club is too long and unwieldy to properly control and return the club to square at impact. Maybe it's the overall weight that's too light, causing a balance issue, or the shaft is too flexible as well. The scatter pattern is the hardest of any of them to diagnose, but at least you could start by gripping down on the club to see if it makes it any better. Now going to the right, if a player's shots hit consistently lower on the club face, that person should strongly consider a shallower face club or a low profile head, or one with a wider sole. In each case, more weight will be concentrated lower and closer to the impact area, providing a more solid feel and improved performance. There's also a chance that that club could be too short or the ball is too far forward in the stance. The latter is something that could be tested right away without any alteration to the existing club. Now, high in the face is generally the opposite. And really any of these problems and solutions can be reversed if the opposite occurs. But high in the face, especially on a club without the assistance of a tee, can be attributed to a steep angle of attack. Ball position plays a direct role in that. Too long of a club could also be the root of the cause, or even something minor like a reduced amount of offset when choosing a new set of irons. If the clustering is out near the toe, but consistent, then you could look at the following. You can use if that person's using a compact head, specifically like an iron, look for one with a longer blade length. You can also look at flattening the lie out if that was a possibility, especially if the ball flight's a pole. Another consideration is lengthening the club, as that's going to push the club further from you. Now, if the impacts were in the heel, then the opposite suggestions would be advised. And don't forget about sole impact either, not just for lie, especially on irons and wedges, but the face angle as well, just by looking at the direction of the brush marks on your sole. Well, that's a wrap. Hopefully we've shown you a few things that can help you or your customer lower your score by learning how to understand what the impact marks on your clubs are telling you. Now let's turn this back over to Rob, and we can answer your questions in the little time we have left today.
Great presentation, Jeff. Very insightful. Thank you so much. All right, folks, you can type your questions into the question box located on your dashboard on your upper right-hand corner. Also, if you look at the last slide here, this webinar is being taped, and in about an hour it's going to be on youtube.com/HirikoGolf and on our blog. Okay, let's just see here. Wait a couple more moments here for our questions. Also, Jeff has written 2 best-selling books that are available online, and that's The Modern Guide to Club Making, which is now available in 4 colors. It used to be black and white, and also the Total Club Fitting in the 21st Century book. Maybe you answered everyone's questions, Jeff, or unless they're busily typing. Wait a few more moments
or went to sleep.
No. Extremely informative webinar. Okay. This one's from Norman. Does the CG move a little depending on the path? Does the CG move, the center of gravity, move a little depending on the path?
Well, the CG of the head is a constant. That can't change unless there's any moving parts. The CG of the club could slightly, just because at rest the shaft will be straight, but there is some downward bowing of the shaft, plus the shaft may be bowing forward. So due to that, the center of gravity of the whole system may change slightly.
Okay, folks, if there's no more questions, we'll wrap it up, but you can type your questions into the box and Jeff will answer them. We'll wait a few more moments here. If not, we'll wrap it up.
Either that, or you can email me as well. On the last slide's my email address.
Okay, guys, thanks so much for attending the webinar today. We'll be here again next month. Look forward to seeing you, and thanks again, Jeff.
Thanks all for attending.